All right. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all our students and participants to the Global Compact for Migration certificate program. As usual, every Saturday we meet here and are glad to host the special lecture series under the Global Compact for Migration. And today we are diving, even further into the units. And I think we have had some very interesting discussions and deliberations in the previous Saturdays and meeting every Tuesday when we have met for the webinars. And today we want to just take another deep dive again on this lecture series. I'm very honored to welcome Dr. Benjamin Schraven, who is a migration expert, a freelance consultant, and associate fellow of the German Development Institute. And he's also an associate fellow at the Center for Development Research based at the University of Bonn and the Center for Study of Global Human Movement at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Benjamin holds a PhD in development studies, and he has been doing a number of interesting work as a consultant for the International Organization for Migration and various UN agencies. Actually, I spotted in the course of my work, I have spotted Dr. Benjamin also doing some work for UNESCO. So quite interesting to see him featuring there as well. So a wide range of experience that he brings to share with us. And also he has been serving and working with German institutions such as being on the Expert Council on Integration and Migration, as well as the German Society for International Cooperation on various migration-related issues. And the thematic complex that is a major piece of his work is on climate migration. And he's also published regularly in scientific journals and other publication formats. And today he's going to be speaking to us following along Unit 2, where we're looking, Unit 3, where we're looking at migration, diaspora, and transnationalism. So, and for now, I'd like to just hand over directly to Dr. Benjamin to take us through the lead. Over to you, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patty. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to have been invited for this course and to give this presentation. I have to admit, I mean, it was quite spontaneous, so please be patient with me if I appear to be a bit confused at times, because I had to quickly work on the presentation. But anyways, let's just start. I mean, let me try to load the presentation I have prepared for this course. Oh, yes. Okay, I guess you can all see the presentation. Actually, when I was approached to give a talk in this course, I said, well, I cannot give like a basic introduction to transnationalism, remittances, and other things which are of huge importance to this module of the course. But I recently conducted a study for UNESCO. UNESCO, some of you might know, is the Regional Economic and Social Commission for West Asia. It's not only West Asia, in fact, it's also for some of the North African countries. So you can say it's the Economic and Social Commission for the MENA region. They have a so-called national agenda for the future of Syria, and they commissioned a series of studies focusing on remittance flows between major hosting countries of Syrian refugees and Syria. So there's one study I conducted on remittances flows in the diaspora, the Syrian diaspora in Germany, and there's one on Jordan, there's one on Turkey. So I thought, well, probably this might be an interesting study for this whole complex of, diaspora, transnationalism, remittances, and a couple of other issues which are, as I said already, of high importance to this whole module and the course as a whole, I guess. So I'm going to present some findings of the study, which will also be published, I think, quite soon in December or so. And of course, I mean, this is just an example to highlight some aspects within the whole debate on migration and development and the other issues I already mentioned. I think let's first of all start with a bit of a glossary, because there are different definitions for the terms I already mentioned. Let's start with transnationalism. I just used a very common one and also a quite old one already. This is by Schiller et al. Transnationalism is the process by which immigrants build social fields that link together their country of origin and their country of settlement. Right, that's quite broad. That's quite understandable. I think we can move on to diaspora, which is, of course, also a central term for this whole debate. Diaspora, and that's according to the German migration scholar Boris Nieswand, who's probably the most appreciated diaspora expert in the German academia. He said diaspora is a type of ethnic and or religious minority. These are population groups with references to the country of origin that they have mostly been maintained over generations, whose self-image sometimes is shaped by a traumatic history of migration. Their cross-border loyalties, relationships, orientations distinguish diaspora groups from other types of ethnic and or religious minorities. I at times find the term diaspora a bit problematic, because I mean, it actually it derives from religion, from early Jewish and Christian groups who were dispersed over many regions, and I mean, sometimes it sounds like as if it implies that, I mean, there is a group of people they're living outside of the place where they are supposed to live. So I find it a bit problematic at times to use this diaspora term. But anyways, I mean, it's the most commonly used term for these kind of groups. Now, another important term is remittances. Remittances are usually understood as money or goods that migrants send back to families and friends in origin countries. They're often the most direct and well-known link between migration and development. Remittances exceed official development aid, but are private funds. Global estimates of financial transfers by migrants include transactions beyond what are commonly assumed to be remittances, as the statistical definitions for the collection of data on remittances is broader. Also, such estimates do not cover informal transfers. Remittances can also be of a social nature, such as the ideas, behaviors, identity, social capital, and knowledge that migrants acquire during their residence in another part of the country or abroad that can be transferred to communities of origin. So that's quite a broad definition, but I used it because, I mean, as you will see later on, it's quite important also to take in mind these informal transfers. But we can also clearly say that this whole debate on migration and development is mainly about remittances. It was already mentioned in the definition that remittances, meanwhile, are much, much higher than the aggregated amount of ODA, of official development aid, as officially published by the OECD. This is what you see here. This is a figure being published by the World Bank and shows the amount of remittances of money sent by migrants to emerging economies and developing countries since 1990. So remittances are the thick red line. And you can see that already back in the 1990s, remittances overtook official development aid. And meanwhile, they even overtook foreign direct investments into emerging countries and development countries. Currently, it is estimated that remittances, official remittances, have exceeded the 500 billion US dollar line. But, and again, this is quite important. This is only what banks and so-called money transfer companies such as Western Union and others report to the World Bank. There's a lot of informal transactions going on out there, as you certainly are aware of. So the real amount, if we could only estimate, that will be much, 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 much higher. So remittances clearly are a global economic factor you cannot ignore. And of course, it's not only about the amount of remittances. I mean, there's huge debate behind it, you know. It's about what actually are the effects of remittances to recipients, to communities where these remittances arrive. What are they used at? And I mean, there's huge debate, also with mixed results. But I think in the end, the findings are rather positive. It might certainly increase social inequality at times, but we can clearly see that remittances are used to reinvest. They are spent on local businesses. They're used for healthcare purposes, for educational purposes. So it's also, of course, a huge development factor, if you will. This is a table which is was originally developed by the Dutch migration scholar Hein de Haas. It is also quite interesting as a background for our discussion today. It shows the development of notions on this development migration nexus, on the linkages between migration and development over the past, let's say, 50 years or so. Sorry. Yeah. It's quite interesting that in the global north, in the OECD world, until like the early 1970s, there was a lot of optimism concerning the linkages between development and migration, both in the research community as well as in the policy arena. Generally, a lot of policies were still kind of informed by the modernization theory, where human mobility was actually part of a necessary or perceived as a necessary part of a societal transformation process. People also saw the capital and knowledge transfers by migrants and the positive effects on that. But that, I mean, all of a sudden that stopped due to the global oil crisis in 1973. And after that, you could see the increasing pessimism, first of all, in the research community, issues like the brain drain, and other things were introduced to the debate also by scholars of the global south, like Jagdish Bhagwati, for instance. And also in the policy field, there was a growing skepticism, concerns on these issues like brain drain, they grew. Also migration largely went out of sight in development policies and other policy fields as well. Interestingly, it's already since the 1990s, we could see that there was a readjustment to more neutral, slightly positive views in academia. under the influence of increasing empirical frameworks like NELM, that's New Economics of Labor Migration. The livelihood approach was quite influential at that time, or still is in certain areas. And of course, also transnationalism research that was kind of the issue of the hour in research. And of course, likewise, it still is until today. We can see in the policy field, there was still kind of a persistent skepticism on migration and development interlinkages, and then even a tightening of immigration policies that already started like in the 1980s could be observed. Interestingly, now since the 2000s, the boom in publications generally, results on migration and development interlinkages are quite mixed, but I think overall, one can say that the positive views on the link they are stronger than the neutral or the negative ones. And more interestingly, you can see if you look at the policy fields, in particular development cooperation, there was a resurgence of migration and development, the optimistic view on that, under the influence of the literature on remittances, on brain gain, on diaspora involvement, and I mean also development cooperation, for instance, started to work in these areas. I mean, it's not a major field of development cooperation, but I think it is an important field, and it still exists today, even despite all this. All these discussions about how to tackle the root cause of forced displacement and what the EU, for instance, does in West Africa, but it's still an important field which actually was really, really fueled by all this literature on transnationalism and remittances. But I think somebody raised his or her hand. Is that right?
I think he's gone.
Yeah, but I think he's put it down. Yeah.
Okay, so there. I mean, if there's a question, we can also address it right away. But otherwise, I just now.
Actually, there's okay. Bandara, you can go ahead. I've seen Bandara is back. You can go ahead. It just takes about a minute for Bandara. You want to unmute yourself so that we can hear your question? And then I also saw that Jacob has posted some questions. I'm happy to read them, but Jacob, you are welcome to share your questions as well. Maybe we go to Jacob Waiswa. Jacob, are you available, or shall I just go ahead and read your questions? I think maybe Bandara is having a problem with unmuting. Okay,
sorry,
Bandara is ready. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's a mistake. Sorry, continue, please.
Okay, all right, that's all right. So let me go ahead and read out Jacob's questions. And he's asking sort of at what point of the migration cycle are migrants able to make remittances? And also, you know, do they need a legal backing, as well as which category of migrants make remittances?
Well, actually, that is kind of the major points of this presentation. I mean, migrants oftentimes start immediately to send money back to their families, and often refugees. And that's why I'm saying, I mean, this is what the presentation is also about. Also, refugees send money home. And I mean, oftentimes they do not really wait until they earn a decent amount of money, but even if they live on like social benefits, which is even in Germany not really a lot of money, but even then they take their 10, 20, 30, 40 euro and send it back to the families. I mean, that's also what we saw, for instance, with the Syrian refugees who were arriving in Germany increasingly, particularly around 2015. So it's not an issue of, well, people need to establish themselves economically, and then they start sending money. Oftentimes they feel obliged to send it right away after they've arrived. And if they earn 1 euro, sometimes they'll send 50 cents back to the family.
Thank you for that. I don't think we have any hands up, so we will. Okay, Ngozi is there. Ngozi, Mr. Lewis, please go ahead. You just need to unmute yourself so we can hear you. And then after that, we have Tekang. I think we have lost you still need to unmute yourself. Ngozi, let me just, okay, ask you to unmute. Okay, please go ahead, Ngozi, the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah, you just unmute me now. Yeah, please, I'm reeling from malaria, which is endemic here. So my face might be funny. Please, can you address its link between migration and also border control and externalization of border affects the amount of remittances sent to origin countries? Like the remittances, since Nigeria has been made, my country, Nigeria, has been made a priority country for Europe in border externalization, remittances has decreased. And also, since the new pact for migration and asylum started early this year, so many returnees, so many Nigerians have been deported to Nigeria, thereby reducing the amount of remittances that comes to Nigeria. And remittances is also about 4% of GDP of Nigeria, which is even higher than most populous countries like India and China. India is 3.2, China is 0.1. So my question is, could you please address the fact that the border externalization is reducing remittances, while Europe wants ECOWAS countries to integrate their borders so that they can move around? Europe at the same time stops migrants from going to Europe, and these are reducing remittances. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll take one more question. Tekang, if you can also be very punctual on it, so that it's great to have the questions coming in, because it's showing that there's interaction in the room. Tekang, yes. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Ma, and thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin. I want to find out from you, what's the difference between remittances and transfer earnings? Because from my economics knowledge, transfer earnings are money or financial assistance which is given to someone without any work done. For example, mother to father, like monthly allowance, and from cousins and a lot more. And I do believe that migrants do send money back home. Maybe we can consider it as remittances, of course, which is definitely as transfer earnings back home. So I don't know how we can try to get a dichotomous line between remittances and transfer earnings.
Thank you for that. Dr. Benjamin, over to you.
Well, I mean, whenever there are private transfers, I mean, that's now even the official definition by the World Bank. Whenever there are private transfers between two or several persons from country A to country B, it's considered remittances. So I wouldn't know how to better answer your question. I mean, that's also a bit funny, because I think a lot of transfers which aren't necessary remittances are considered remittances, because I mean, they just, well, look at private transfers and that's it. On the first question by Mr. Ngozi, yeah, well, I mean, that's of course one of the paradoxes of the European approach. They are interested in boosting the effect of remittances. They clearly see the positive potential it has, but I mean, it's strictly restricted to high-skilled labor, or maybe increasingly, hopefully, skilled labor. But I mean, apart from like a small corridors of skilled labor migration, I think they do not really see the potential which is granted. And I mean, they do not see the paradoxes. And I mean, even you can go further. All these strict border control measures which are imposed in West Africa, sometimes you hear the term, I mean, Europe is externalizing its borders to the Sahel. I mean, that it's also disrupting migration flows within Africa, within West Africa, which of course are much stronger, much more intensive than the migration from West Africa to Europe. And I mean, it's also actively reducing this development potential, if you will, of migration processes, of remittances, which of course are also being sent around within countries, West African countries, and everywhere between countries of West Africa. Yeah, well, what can I say? I mean, it's really a paradoxy, and obviously we didn't do a good job in convincing policymakers to take a better look on these developments, but we keep on trying.
Thank you. Maybe we can go. We can let you go ahead now with the presentation. Thank you.
All right. So that was just the attempt to present some central terms and the background of this whole debate and where we are at. So I think that is why also Mr. Ngodi's question was quite placed at the right time. It was a very good question at the right time. Now let's take a look at this study I was mentioning on the Syrian diaspora in Germany and remittances flows between Germany and Syria. In terms of methodology, the study is based on, well, first of all, discipline analysis of the available literature and the secondary data sets, like for the Federal Office of Migration and Refugee Affairs, Federal Employment Agencies, and other sources. I also conducted qualitative interviews with experts, for instance, from the Federal Agency for Migration and Refugees, but also with Syrians living in Germany. Furthermore, 2 online surveys were conducted, both based on a respondent-driven sampling, so they are not representative, which actually is not really possible because, I mean, as you can imagine, remittances sending behavior is kind of a sensitive issue. But anyways, I think it's truly possible to draw some general conclusion out of this work. At least I hope so. So one online survey targeted social workers, volunteers who are working with Syrian refugees, and the other one, of course, also targeted the Syrian diaspora in Germany. In total, 124 social workers, volunteers, migration officers were interviewed with the online survey, and 150 Syrians were also interviewed. Some words on the background. Germany as a country of immigration, and in particular, Germany as a country of Syrian immigration. Although Germany has been struggling with its role as an immigration country, it's not really part of the German identity, at least it hasn't been for a long time, to call itself a country of immigration. But I mean, the institutional efforts to improve the socioeconomic integration of migrants and asylum seekers have been intensified since the 1990s, and again, particularly since the 2000s, that led to a situation where protection seekers in Germany with a so-called subsidiary protection status, which means as a temporary limited protection status, which applied at least initially for many of the Syrian refugees who were arriving in Germany. These protection seekers, plus the ones who have, let's call it, a full refugee status according to the 1951 Geneva Convention, have full access to the German labor market and might basically enjoy a wide scale of social benefits, like the basic social benefit for living costs, but there are also additional ones like for paying rents and heating money and other things. So they can enjoy a wide scale of these benefits too. And mainly due to the strong immigration of Syrian refugees in 2015, the Syrian community, that's also quite important to keep in mind for, well, the potential of remittances flows. So not the actual one, but let's call it the potential of remittance flows between Germany and Syria. The diaspora grew from 30,000, like in 2010, up to more than 800,000 people 10 years later, late 2020. Which is an amazing increase by a factor of 27. So that's quite a lot, I would say. Now, let's take a look at the key results from the literature and the secondary data analysis. On average, Syrians in Germany have been living in the country for 4.8 years. You can see that clearly indicates the massive influx we could experience, in particular in 2015 or around 2015. This also indicated by the fact that only about 10% of Syrians are born in Germany. And furthermore, the average age of Syrians living in Germany is 25 years, so way younger than the average age of the overall population. That's also clearly still a result of this 2015 situation, where in the first bigger wave, young men in particular from Syria have arrived in Germany. We can also see that in the gender balance, or it's rather still an imbalance, because I mean 59% of the Syrian diaspora are male and only 41 are female. But I mean, also due to other processes, this imbalance is decreasing in recent years. Another interesting fact is also that the share of Muslim Arab Syrians in Germany has grown significantly, when it has been rather the small diaspora before 2011, 2010. The Syrian minorities, such as Kurds, were represented in a much stronger way. Now, looking at the assessment and also the self-assessment of Syrians living in Germany, and the assessment of the social workers, volunteers, migration officers, one could say that the socioeconomic situation of Syrians living in Germany is rather positive, which again is of course also quite an important indicator for the potential of remittance flows between Germany and Syria. We can see that 71% of the adult population of Syrians living in Germany are school graduates, and there's an increasing number of university students with a Syrian background, and also apprentices, so in TVET. The share of Syrians living on basic security benefits is constantly decreasing. I mean, initially, when many of them arrive, and they had to undergo language training and so-called integration training. Of course, I mean that share was very, very high, which is kind of natural, but I mean, it has really gone down in recent years. Likewise, the employment rate has grown in the past years now to 33%. Which is still below average of the foreign national population in Germany. But I mean, the increasing, the growing rates here are likewise quite positive. And we can also see increasingly entrepreneurial activities of Syrians living in Germany, the higher growing share of shop owners, sectors like gastronomy are partly booming in despite COVID-19. And we can also see, and that is, of course, also very, very important when we consider the potential of remittances flows between Germany and Syria, the willingness to stay permanently in Germany is very high, and it has even grown in recent years. In 2017, it was already quite high, but it was still below 80%, 2018 between 80 and 90%. And now in late 2019, it was almost 90% of the Syrians who were interviewed in a panel survey stated that they could imagine to stay in Germany permanently, or at least in quite a long-term perspective. Now, I talked a bit about the remittances sending potential. Let's have a quick look, or let me drop some words on the regulatory environment in Germany for remittances flows. I mean, Germany contemporarily ranks among the most, or the top remittances sending countries in the world. I mean, it's even the top 5. But the German remittance market is quite regulated. Non-bank remittance service providers face difficulties in operating in the German market, and they also lack access to accounts at commercial banks. Now, informal ways of sending money is in particular the so-called, or according to the Hawala banking principle. I will say some few more words on that shortly. Are virtually illegal in Germany. And they are mainly associated with things such as, I mean, now in the German context, they're associated with terror financing, organized crime, or tax evasion. Now, I think I saw somebody raised his or her hand.
That's okay. We will take questions. I think we allow you to just present so that we can have a concise idea, and we will ask participants to come back. They're putting the questions in the chat as well.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so we will come back to the Q&A in a bit.
All right. Now, in the case of Syria, it's also due to sanctions, financial sanctions, other sanctions against the Syrian Arab Republic and the government of Bashar al-Assad. There are severe limits to using formal financial channels when sending money from Germany to Syria. Furthermore, there's also something called de-risking, which means that banks and money transfer operators and companies such as Western Union, sometimes they abandon the access to accounts or to financial services because they simply fear that there might be sanction too. Now, one more word, or let's say back to the glossary, I was mentioning the term Hawala. I mean, I have been living and working quite a lot in West Africa, so I always need to take care that I don't confuse it with the Nigerian term Wahala, which is something else. But this one is about Hawala. And the Hawala system is an informal remittances transfer system that does not require transfer's identity verification, and thereby is also refraining from detecting and reporting suspicious transactions. The transfer of money is carried out through unregulated networks with no physical or electronic movement of money. The settlement takes place between two hawaladas, so hawala dealers. One is the sender and the other is the receiver of the money. And that is quite important. The difference between the Hawala system and the term Hawala is Hawala simply means transfer, exchange, or wire in High Arabic, but I mean, usually Syrians and other people who are native Arabic speakers, they do not use the term Hawala because, I mean, it's High Arabic and it's, they simply, oftentimes they do not even know the term Hawala. I mean, it's kind of a technical term used in the academic community, used in the finance community, and this whole remittances community, but I mean, it's not actually a term that people use. While Hawala transactions are mostly initiated by immigrant workers living in a developed country, the Hawala system can also be used to send funds from a developing country, even though the purpose of the funds transfer is usually different. The system usually works as follows, and it's also quite important. A payer who wants to transfer cash to a payee must trust the hawaladah, the merchant, to whom he or she hands over the cash. So the payee, on the other hand, must trust the hawaladah. Often a code agreed between payer and payee is used to authenticate the Hawala. How the Hawala are connected to each other, so in country A and country B, in financial or even in other terms, is usually unclear to both payers and payees. So it's kind of a middleman system, which is not, of course, not only in place when it comes to remittances being sent from Germany to Syria, but it exists in many other so-called remittance corridors. Now, officially, that's reported by the Bundesbank, which is the federal German bank, remittance flows between Germany and Syrian Arab Republic were estimated for 2020 at around 308 million euro. That is an official number, but we can all assume that the real amount of remittances flows between Germany and Syria is much higher. According to the results of the online survey, which has been conducted with the Syrian diaspora representatives, Hawalas are the mostly used option to remit money from Germany to Syria. But I mean, it's associated with a lot of problems. For instance, exchange rate fluctuations, and simply a distance or lacking access to banks and other financial services. I mean, that's not attached to the Hawala system, but that is actually the reason why people are using these Hawala systems. Other ways are simply too expensive, and for certain regions where people would like to send money to, it's virtually even not possible. Also depending on whether these territories and regions are controlled by the government or by other fractions of the conflict in Syria. You can see it's almost up to 50% say it's Hawala or other kind of cash transfers. That means that people are giving money to somebody, for instance, who travels to Lebanon, which at least in 2020 that was still possible. I mean, meanwhile, it's also quite complicated because of the conflict or the dire situation Lebanon is facing currently, well, not only currently, also for some time now. Registered MTOs, that means sending money, for instance, with Western Union, is definitely less than 20%. Well, here we can see the official statistics on remittances flows between Germany and Syria. As I said, well, we can look at these figures and these numbers, but we have to keep in mind that the real numbers must be much higher. However, we can see a definitely growing tendency in remittance flow, and I think that should go actually hand in hand with the real remittances flows, if we could only really determine those. It's also quite important to keep in mind that the money which is being sent from Germany to Syria is actually used for meeting, by the recipients, it's used for meeting basic needs. So we're talking about paying rents, buying food, healthcare, heating. Those are the purposes that the money is spent for. And regarding the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on remittances flows, well, I mean, the impressions or the answers by the Syrian respondents were actually quite mixed. So I think there was not a dramatic decrease in the money which has been sent, and I think that goes also hand in hand with the World Bank calculations about remittances worldwide. The World Bank was initially expecting a dramatic decrease of remittances flows between developing countries and emerging economies worldwide, but I think that didn't really materialize. So remittance flows, even despite all these hardships due to the COVID-19 pandemic, they remain quite high. I think that is also the case for remittances from Germany to Syria. The Syrian response also clearly state that lower transfer costs and also more official, formal options to send money would really be helpful to improve the situation, well, for them, and also, of course, for the recipients, which are, of course, their families back in Syria. Here, so once again, just a figure on the purposes that the remitted money is spent for. As I said, it's paying rent, it's buying food, educational purposes, medical issues, and heating. So it's really about the basic needs. Now, based on that, I mean, it's actually quite hard to formulate policy recommendations, which was a requirement by UNESCO. I mean, it's quite hard because nobody, I mean, at least many actors, international actors, do not really would like to strengthen the regime in Damascus. But I think to improve the situation when it comes to remittances flows and to have better access to more remittances for the people on the ground in Syria, the establishment of a dialogue process with a multiple set of stakeholders would be a good option to start with. And then this one should focus on options actually really to improve the conditions for remittances flows to the Syrian Arab Republic. But as I said, it's of course quite difficult as, nobody would really like to have the Syrian regime being sitting at many tables again. So it should be quite single purpose oriented. So really a complex and difficult situation. But anyways, I mean, given the results of this enormous importance of the German role as remittances sending country, or I should better say the role of the Syrian diaspora in Germany as a source of remittances flows, German stakeholders, we're talking about government, private financial sector, civil society, could play an essential role in such a dialogue process. But I mean, for the German context, an important step would be to have a broader public discussion and more awareness raising about the circumstances and the actual purposes of the money which is remitted to Syria. Because, I mean, there are many misconceptions. People think that this money is being spent on terror financing, buying weapons, and a lot of other things which definitely do not meet the reality on the ground. And also when it comes to these Hawala transactions, this is also mainly associated with a lot of negative things. And I mean, Hawala systems are used for these negative things, that is for sure. But on the other hand, I mean, people really need that to remit money because the other options, they might work, but they're extremely expensive. And in some cases, they're not even possible when it comes to sending money to certain regions of Syria. Now, what does this all tell us? Now, probably some generalized impressions. I think this example of the Syrian diaspora in Germany, of Syrian refugees in particular, sending money back to Syria shows us that we should also look at refugees as active actors with an agency. Because, you know, in general societal context, in policy context, sometimes in academia, there's a tendency to portray refugees as victims on the one hand side. Sometimes they are being portrayed as potential perpetrators, as security threats for the hosting societies. In particular, of course, when it comes to quite conservative right-wing politicians in Europe and elsewhere. But we simply need to understand that also refugees are, well, they're active actors, and they are, if you will, also development brokers. We shouldn't underestimate this role. And refugees are also creating strong bonds between two countries. Now that's, of course, now the transnationalism related component to this whole story. They are creating strong bonds between, in this case, Germany and Syria. But on the other hand, policymakers and German society is not really aware how strong these bonds are. I think that is why it's really so important that we have really much broader public discussion on these issues. Well, I think that's the presentation so far. I would just say thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion, which can start right now.
Yes, and the hands are coming up, being raised. So I think this has been a very insightful discussion instead of having our typical kind of lecture where we dive into the technical terms or we try to dive into the relations with theory. But I think it's kind of bringing us to how the concepts and the terminologies have been used in different spaces, and particularly the example from Germany with Syrian migrants from the research that you have done is an interesting way of seeing the interaction between the three concepts, not just from a definition point of view. I think it's more so from an application point of view and the interlinkages that are there. So thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin, for this. I will now hand over to starting with Mr. Bese, and after that, we will move Mr. Ngozi, and then Ahmed, I see your hand is up. So Mr. Bese, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. We all know that policies are the bedrock of development of countries all over the world. We know that. But sometimes we see that policies are deliberately targeted at migrants, like Tyson's movement of people, against migrant policy deliberately targeting at migrants. My question is, how can we help in policy formulation and influence implementation in favor of migrants all over the world, not just only between Syria and Germany, but West Africa that I come from, with Europe and other continents at large? Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. Maybe we take one more and then we will go back to Dr. Benjamin so that we give him time to respond to each. Thanks for being precise with that question. Ms. Ngozi, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. That's very insightful. In your work, did you check the percentage of money transfer, the cost of money transfer, the percentage from Germany to Syria? Because in Nigeria, the cost is up to 18%. Again, did you also check the influence of remittances on return intentions of Syrians in Germany? Because in my work here in Nigeria, I'm working with Cameroonian refugees. I discovered that some of them, when you ask them how much do they want to get back to their country, if you say 50 naira, about okay, if you say 50,000 naira, that's about $100 US or less, they will not agree. But when you start mentioning about 150,000 naira, that is around 300 US, they will agree to go back home, because it's not all part of Cameroon is in crisis, is in conflict. Some part of Cameroon, like the eastern part of Cameroon, is not in crisis. And I know in Syria, it's not also all parts of Syria is in crisis. Another one is, did you discover or did you check if there is a diaspora organization in Syria that helps, or diaspora commission in Syria that helps harness the resources of Syrians in Germany so that they can use it also to develop Syria? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ngozi, and we hope that you will feel better from the malaria there. I totally understand that, how that one can hit you. So it's good to see you. It's good to see you in the class. Ahmed.
Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon, Dr. Fadi. I want to ask two questions. One question is on the first contribution made by Ngozi, my fellow citizen in Nigeria. Actually, I'm calling from Nigeria, Plateau State. He made reference to the issue of remittances being affected by the return of migrants from Europe to Nigeria. So actually, I'm trying to ask, is the decline in remittances as reported in March 2021 and by 27% by Central Bank, is that drop related to the return of migrants, or is it related to coronavirus pandemic? I think we should be more critical. This drop is not as a result of return of the migrants. Of course, we can also link the return of the migrants to the crisis of COVID in Europe. To some extent, we can do that, but as an academic, we have to be critical. We can't just say the drop of remittances to Nigeria by 27% is as a result of return migrants. What is the number of migrants that return from Europe? What is their capacity? How many of them send back remittances to Nigeria? So before we make this strong statement, one should be critical enough to make this. Second observation I want to make is a question to Doctor. How do you think the crypto, because I want to relate this to that concept of Hawala, how do you think cryptocurrency will make remittances faster and more effective and more helpful to developing countries? I have a case of Afghanistan. As of 2020, Afghanistan was not on the list of the global crypto adoption index. But between 2020 June till date, Afghanistan is 20 on the list of 154 countries. We can attribute this to the failure of government in Afghanistan recently, taken over of the government by Taliban, which led to the shutdown of the Western money transfer in Afghanistan and other international money transfer mediums. So now people who receive remittances from abroad to Afghanistan have to resort to crypto. And it's really making access to finance, to wealth very fast and quick, and it's improving the life of the people in Afghanistan. This goes, it applies to other countries around the world. Thank you very much. I really appreciate if you will make a further discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just give a few minutes to Dr. Benjamin to react to those as other questions are coming up. I also noticed that Jacob, you had asked the question, so feel free to come on the next set. Over to you, Dr. Benjamin.
Maybe let me start with the first question by Mr. Bassi. Well, I think it's at least up to us. I mean, academic people from the NGO world, civil society, to pump our lines. I mean, I don't know for how many times I've written somewhere. I mean, not in purely academic publication formats, but I mean, at times I'm also asked for like general pieces, opinion pieces in the media. For instance, that the perception of the European perception of Africa, I mean, as a continent where half of the population is sitting on packed suitcases and is just waiting for the next opportunity to travel to Europe, is completely misguided. There are simple statistics by UNFPA and others, UNDESA, which clearly shows otherwise. I mean, we have to keep on repeat our messages. Sometimes, I mean, it helps. And I mean, what makes me quite optimistic at times is that, I mean, despite all that what the EU does in Africa with UTF and the other things, nonetheless, the global community could at least establish the global compact on migration, for instance. I know it's not legally binding and all that, but at least, I mean, the message is there, and I mean which provides hopefully some ground for really making safe, regularly, and orderly migration possible. That's at least somewhat optimistic. Now, the second set of questions by Mr. Ngozi on remittances and, for instance, return intentions. No, I could not really look at such a correlation. But I mean, I think I showed the figure on the percentage of Syrians who actually intend to stay in Germany, which is really, really high, almost 90%. But we also know that there is a strong social obligation for Syrians to send money back to their families. And for some, I mean, the pressure is even that high that people were actually considering to return to Syria because they were actually afraid of running into bankruptcy in Germany, and that was probably not the only reason why people went back to Syria. But I mean, there are some cases where that actually happened. Now, I must confess, I do not remember the second question by Mr. Ngozi. Maybe could you quickly repeat it, please?
Okay. I mean, is there any diaspora commission or diaspora body that harnesses resources from Syrians abroad for the development of Syria, like we have here in Nigeria? We also have a diaspora policy in Nigeria that helps to develop Nigeria here.
No, I mean, Syria is still a country in conflict. And I mean, a lot of people do not trust the Syrian government, and they would refuse any attempts to be part of an official diaspora policy, which is well, part of the official Syrian government policies. But I mean, there are networks which also try to make use of the money for other purposes now, which go beyond, well, paying, giving money to pay rents and to buy food, and also for, let's say, communal purposes. But I think there is, if you look at the general debate, we must not forget, there are some people who say, well, I mean, in the long term, these remittances, look at the sheer amount of money which is being sent. Maybe that's better than, for instance, development cooperation or this ODA, official development aid. I doubt it. Not the part about the ODA, but we must not forget, I mean, basically, remittances are private transfers. And well, you can use some part of the money for communal purposes, like to build schools and health centers or whatsoever. But I mean, the core will also be their private transactions. I mean, from individuals to individuals. And I mean, they will never replace investments into all kinds of public infrastructures, I think. There have been attempts, for instance, in Mexico and also other countries to make use of these remittances. There were top-ups of every dollar which was sent by migrants for these communal purposes, for instance, topped up by the regional and the federal government. But I think these attempts in the end will always be quite limited. I mean, the effects of these attempts will in the end always quite limited, because people send money, first of all, for their families. That's it.
Thank Thank you. I think you still got some questions that came from I think Mr. Ngozi, I think you answered these questions, Mr. Bese, and then I think, shall we go to the next set, or did you have more reflections on the first set of questions? Ahmed had some questions, I think, Ahmed's questions as well.
That was on e-money, the potential of e-money, as far as I understood.
Yes, and crypto. I think he mentioned sort of
crypto.
Yes, the crypto.
Well, I mean, of course, there is potential, but as in the case of Syria, for instance, it's quite hard to exploit this potential, because I mean, you mustn't forget, I mean, it's still a country at war, in conflict, and with many international actors being part of this Syrian tragedy, if you will. It's quite hard to establish now these kinds of financial means for Syrian people to make use of. But in general, I would agree. There is still a lot of potential in these kind of things, but I mean, it's not a one size fits all kind of solution for the world, and in particular not for countries who are in such an extreme situation, or still are in such an extreme situation, such as Syria.
Thank you. So let's take a next set of questions. Mr. Eugene, after that, Mr. Sheku, Benedict, and Joanne Gloria, you're welcome to take the floor in that order. Eugene. Eugene, we may have some connection issues. Do you just want to check if you could give us a better connection? Otherwise, let me ask actually, Jacob, do you want to take the floor? Because I know, Jacob, you've been trying to ask to be unmuted. So let's start with Jacob. Eugene, your connection is not so good. We cannot hear you. So we will just ask Jacob to start. Jacob, the floor is yours.
Doctor, I guess.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm very happy for this opportunity. My question is that between what years did this study consider? Because over the last 10 years, the life of immigrants have changed so much, and many of them are opting to return because of the bleak future they are facing. And I'm also wondering whether it's not about the unique policies that in certain parts of the world could be influencing such a positive feedback we are seeing from his findings. Unlike again in other parts of the world where refugee policies are very strict, and it's not easy to make a life. Many of them are ending up in prison, detentions. So here, this one is really so encouraging, and it may attract so many people, young people, to rush to Europe, because it is like a heaven. And also I would like to know whether there are some challenges, because there seem not to be any challenges of this, but it seems that whenever they go to Germany, it is obvious that they make all this fortune, and it is easy to return. I've traveled a little bit, and I always find the miserable face of immigrants, and I've never felt like staying in any of the countries I've gone. And so wouldn't we find it just a unique story for German, and this only being applicable to German until we do a comparative analysis with the countries like USA, where policies are so radical, too much racism, no rights for migrants, So those are actually some of the issues, and probably I don't know if we can if he had time to talk to the migrants themselves, because it seems it was particular about those who have been successful rather than those who have not been successful. Those are my concerns and issues at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacob, for those reflections. Sheku? Sheku, you can go ahead. I've unmuted you. Okay, maybe a connection issue. Benedict?
Yes, madam. And Dicto, thank you for the presentation. So my question is on the, first of all, it started with the policy, research policy evolution on immigrant perspectives. And for example, right now, as at 2000, there's a positive, there's a positive sentiment towards migration, while between 1970 to 1990, we had pessimism in migration, where we saw brain drain. So I wanted to ask, can the same analysis be utilized now? Because even though we glorify things such as remittances, we have instances whereby, for example, areas such as Sudan, areas such as Darfur, Kurdistan that are affected by war, where we see people, the West resorting to practices such as paying armed organizations to prevent migration. And in essence, no matter how much a family that is based in that area receives remittances, the end result is that a person in Europe will end up funding his or her relatives. And so the question is, can there be a way in which, or is there a way or an experiment that has been utilized for the youth to be dissuaded and for investment to occur, rather than us accepting remittances and promoting positive migration? Can as a sentiment be utilized in order to dissuade and dissuade migration and encourage investment, direct investment, rather than remittances and people moving?
Thank you. Sheku? Okay, let's have Joanne Gloria.
Thank you very much, Sister Dr. Pari, for the good work you normally do for us. And thank you so much, Dr. Ari. We say Dr. Ari in Kenya, Dr. Benjamin. I had put my question in the chat box that do remittance only refer to the monies that are sent to the origin country, or also some items, stuff that the people there send back home, like stuff that we use at home, or other items? Secondly, like we have said, I have heard Dr. mention that Germany is one of the highest remittance sending country globally. Now, my question is there a way that the migrants can be integrated? Like we have talked about, the transnationalism can be put back and can be adopted and take the migration positively, so that they can also be enjoying equal rights, equal pay for whatever they do. Because I believe as much as the origin country receives some remittance, the destination country also has the benefit of the manpower. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne Gloria. I think we have a problem with Sheku's connection, so maybe we just ask you, Dr. Benjamin, to take those remarks, to take the questions.
Maybe I start with the last one. I mean, yeah, I mean, in theory, I think there are some considerations on that, but I think what I said earlier is still valid. I mean, these remittances are a private transfer. And when we say, for instance, Germany is one of the biggest remittances sending countries in the world. Well, I mean, it's not the product of active or intentional German policy, you know, that, oh, we would like to be where we are as Germans sending money out. No, I mean, it's simply the process which is initiated by millions of migrants living in Germany, including refugees living in Germany. Yeah, I mean, this idea that you pay a tax because, I mean, Germany is also actively making, your German economy is actively making use of manpower. It's there, but I don't think that will ever materialize into a global policy. And on the second questions, this investment with remittances, no, I don't think so. That I mean, similar thoughts have been raised, at least not with the intention to, again, to have it materialized into real policies or so. And I would also be a bit careful. Now that's with regard to the first question, to present this whole case study of Syrians living in Germany sending money to Syria as a huge success story, because I only presented the key results and a bit according to the whole story of transnationalism and remittances and all that. But I mean, what's behind this success story is, of course, there are a lot of tragedies is probably a bit too strong, but I mean, a lot of hardships for people. For instance, I was talking to migrants, I was talking to these social workers, volunteers, supporting refugees living in Germany. And there are a lot of problems, of course. I mean, despite all these public integration efforts and training courses and all that, but I mean, refugees, Syrian refugees and others, migrants in general, face xenophobia, they're facing racism. And in particular for the elderly, it's quite hard. I mean, for instance, to learn German, to come along in German society, a completely new country, new cultural setting. There are intra-family struggles between young and old, because I mean, everybody's now in difficult situations, and I mean, completely no gender roles when they leave the house. For instance, I mean, a lot of things which are imposing hardships also for the Syrians living in Germany. So I'm a bit hesitant to call it a success story. I mean, in general, yes. I mean, the general impression is that, I mean, for many, it's quite positive or rather positive. But on the other hand, we mustn't forget a lot of negative aspects to it, a lot of hardships and trouble. And I mean, I have also heard stories, I think I already indicated that earlier, that I mean, people abandoned their apprenticeships because they were under pressure to send money back home. And I mean, they couldn't do that with a small salary they were receiving while still in apprenticeship. So they abandoned the apprenticeship and started working for McDonald's or so. And finally went home because they couldn't deal with the pressure to send money home any longer. So success story, so.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, will you tackle the other two questions, or should we bring in Jean to ask one more question so that you can add that to the response? Eugene, you're welcome to take the floor.
Thank you very much. I think the connection is better now.
Yes, much better. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, Doctor, thank you for the presentation. I would like to know whether it's not misleading to compare the average age of Syrians in Germany to the overall population of Germany, considering the population pyramid of Germany. Thank you.
Sorry, I could not understand the final part of the question. Could you maybe repeat it briefly? Sorry.
Yes, you compared the average age of Syrians to be 25, compared to the overall average age of Germans to be far lower. And considering the population pyramid of Germany, would this not be misleading, the conclusion? Thank you.
You can go ahead and take all the questions at one go. Thank you.
Okay, Diaspora for repeating. No, but I mean, why would that be misleading? What I was mentioning the average age of the Syrians just to underline. I mean, they are still much younger, and of course, young age in general also shows kind of the economic potential, the demographic advantage of a certain population group over others. Because I mean, the younger in average, the more are you able to work, to participate in the labor market, to put it in an economical way. So that's about it. I mean, I've collected these findings on the socio-economic and demographic issues of the Syrian diaspora, just to show that, I mean, their potential alone for remittances, for remittance flows is really quite high. And I think to a large degree, they already are able to make use of that potential. So that's all that I wanted to say. And that's all the reason, that's the reason why I was, for instance, referring to the average age. That's all.
We try again one more time with Sheku, and then I will ask Dr. Raj to give her reflection. Maybe, okay, Sheku, I think we still have a problem with your connection. Dr. Raj, may I just ask you to comment for about 2 minutes, and then we will be wrapping up in a bit. Just as an introduction, Benjamin, Dr. Raj is one of the vice presidents at the GRFDT, and we are glad that she's able to join us today. As you know, she is based out in the Americas and has covered a lot on South-South migration. Dr. Raj, over to you. We just need you to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hi, greetings. As I always say, I don't say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, too many words. Okay, well, thank you so much to Professor Benjamin, Dr. Benjamin, for this excellent presentation, because this is a micro study, and I want to address to the importance of micro studies for many reasons. One, that they give us this greater insight is to this rather than a macro one, right? So what is the situation, especially if certain sets of population become an issue for the receiving country, how their perceptions are molded. Micro studies help us that they're not there as dependents. So it's not so much the focus on what they send out, but to show that they are not dependent on handouts by state resources, that they are working, because that really breaks the myth or things against refugees. They just come here to take our resources. They come here to sit on our social welfare system, and they don't contribute. And what the study has shown is that most of them are young people. And as you also mentioned, Dr. Benjamin, that they have the economic potentials and perhaps tolerance towards such people, because most European countries need labor force. And thirdly, they're educated people. In other words, they are not the ones who are just coming straight without any resources, without any personal and human resources, and the intention to make not only their life better, but also to contribute, as shown by their intention to stay on permanently rather to return back. So I think these micro studies, perhaps what I would have liked to have seen in the analysis, a little bit more balanced. So while the studies on how much they send out, I would have liked to have some, if not data, some perspective on what they bring into the country in terms of their resources, human resources, the benefit of their age, the education, the fact that they come with their family. That means, you know, there are other family members that are going to be born, and that means there will be continuity. So I would have seen, you know, but we write things for certain perspective. But so I want to mention that this could become even a richer study, because we are bringing in the other aspects, and we are trying to demystify some perspectives that local population has towards refugees and migrants, for that matter. So I think these sort of studies can add a lot to shaping not only people's perspectives, which shapes policies because they influence. So your constituents will influence policies, but it is how such studies can be used by policymakers as a tool to negate, to demystify what people think about migrants and what they think about refugees. I think otherwise I enjoyed the study very much, and I think the participants have been quite active in the discussion, and that shows how much discussion the paper has, because there are a lot of issues that are still, we as academics and researchers grapple, because we don't know, because it's very hard to see how things shape. One thing might be relevant today, 5 years later, we find, well, that was not our conclusion. And something to say on whether the remittances have got, in the case of Germany, because the sending, the regulations in Germany are fairly strict, how you send the money out of the country because of this concern. So you don't see much that the transfers through informal system showing. So that means in Germany, perhaps, and as with the pandemic, people have not been traveling, so they have not been sending money through informal channels. But I think there's a greater control in that way, or transparency in that way. So maybe that doesn't mean that there is more money flowing out, or Germany's it's just that there's more accountability. Just like the World Bank was saying, during the pandemic, the remittances are going to go down, and they, to their surprise, they didn't. And the reason was that there were no informal channels to send the money out. People were not traveling. And therefore, whatever was being sent was sent through the formal channels. So the previous data was underreported. Not that the current data is over or that they're sending more, but the previous data has been underreported because people were using different channels. So in the case of Germany, I think, I haven't done any study, but because there is emphasis on sending money formally, therefore it seems that, and there might be other countries where remittances are also very high, but not captured. So I just wanted to mention that. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Paddy, and thank you to Dr. Benjamin and to participants for taking such active role and interest in these areas. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raj. I don't know, Dr. Benjamin, I will give you the last word on it. So maybe just to say that while we were in the discussion in the room, I had posted 2 questions to sort of get a sense from different participants where they are, a bit of a poll in a sort of traditional way. And it's great to see the chat filling up. I mean, one was important for us to also find out from different participants what does diaspora mean for in your country? How are migrants described? How is diaspora, particularly looking at diaspora, how is that described? And also trying to get a sense of how money is transferred, because we try to link it very much to your presentation. I think, like Dr. Raj has said, there are many dimensions that could be covered under this unit, but we thought that it would be quite interesting to zoom in on the question, on the research paper that you have presented, because as she has said, it gives us a very, some details, and of course it's not the full picture. As you have mentioned, you had an assignment with a particular organization and a focus, some objectives to look at, so you couldn't cover everything, but I think it has really opened, it's been a great eye-opener, I think, for us to get a sense from Syria. And I think just a few other things maybe to add there, as some of the responses are coming in on how money is being transferred, is the underestimation, I think, of informal channels. I mean, we've heard also from other spaces how the post office, for instance, was an important channel for, and for many migrants who would have thought, well, maybe this is not so interesting, but actually for many migrants they do. We're sending money through the post office, and it was also then found out that when we had the lockdowns, those were affected, and in some countries post offices were then made to operate because that was important for migrants. I mean, another space was also the fact that people were essentially handing money from people they trusted at the airport, or friends and family traveling along, and that also meant that a lot of money was not getting to migrants' families and diaspora families in their home countries. So it's sort of interesting to also see how those dimensions are important. And I think the issue of skill is something that has come up quite prominently. And I think the study of Syrian migrants, I think for the diaspora world, has been very interesting in sort of highlighting what you try to talk about, to take away the blindness that maybe let's call it public policies in the global north or Western countries, or countries that are known to be centers of attracting migrants, is what that perception has been like about who really contributes and what skills that migrants come with, so that everybody is not, an interest is not really to get direct benefits from this social healthcare, attractive social package that is available, but is actually looking to contribute to the whole, to the society. People are willing to work. They come with skills, and maybe just for the participants who didn't manage to attend the GCM objective number 3, we were talking on Tuesday, where we covered information to migrants along all stages of their journey. And one interesting presentation that came out there is a research that's being done also in Germany, that's looking particularly at female migrants and trying to provide the right information to this space. And one of the things that the project manager who shared with us, the video is available on our YouTube channel, you can check it out, was that the information sometimes that was being provided to these migrants was assuming a certain type of migrants. And yet when they did a research, they found out that some of the migrants were actually, these female migrants that were targeted were much more educated. They needed a different type of information. Formatting was very important, even the timing that it's provided. So if you have a center open to provide information for integration for somebody who's at work and it's open at 3 o'clock, and someone is at work, there would be definitely no way to access that type of information. So I think your research has been very interesting, I think, for us in opening our eyes to seeing the profile of these migrants. And we will, we hope we can share the presentation, Dr. Benjamin, that you have with us. And we have also been sharing quite a number of resources that look at integration, that look at diaspora, that are also looking at this transnational aspect as well. So over to you, Dr. Benjamin, for some last reflections.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patty, and also for the reflections by Dr. Raj. I agree. We must not forget to talk about what is actually the benefit of these Syrian refugees for the German society, German economy. I mean, at least I tried to indicate it. I mean, the employment rate is 33%. It's of course below average, but I mean, we have to see where these people are coming from in average. I mean, it was in 2015, it was at 7%. I mean, within a very short period of time, it went up like that. And I mean, it's actually quite amazing. But on the other hand, you must not forget, I mean, we're talking about refugees. It's not labor migration, we're talking about refugees. And I mean, Germany signed the Geneva Convention, and it's obliged to host asylum seekers, protection seekers, if they qualify legally, and we shouldn't mix up because I mean that's also what German and I think also many other policymakers do at times. I mean, these people didn't come here to work; these people came in the first place to seek protection. But nonetheless, you're absolutely right, Dr. Raj. We must put more emphasis on actually the benefits that also German society has. And I mean, in Germany as well as in other parts of Europe, we are facing increasingly aging societies on average. Well, migration is not the only solution to it, but I mean, it's definitely a major part of the solution to, well, to generate or to maintain a certain level of wealth. Yeah. Furthermore, I would like to thank all of the, 155 participants, that's quite a lot, for this very active discussion and the attention to my presentation. I think if you have further questions or comments or whatsoever, I think, Patty, you will certainly you can certainly share my email address. So if you would like to discuss with me now after today, that is certainly possible. Just drop me some lines. Yeah, I think the report on Syrian remittances from Germany to Syria will be published in December. Maybe I can also share the report once it is online. So, well, thanks a lot. Was fun for me very interesting for me to participate in this class, in this course. And I can only wish you a nice morning, day, afternoon, evening, and so on, so on. So thanks a lot and bye-bye, all the best.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin, for that. And we have now come to the end. And sorry for taking 5 more minutes, but I think that was important. We have unleashed a lot of interesting areas there for continued discussions in the units as well as in the webinars. So we look forward to seeing you then on Tuesday at the same time, 3 p.m. Central European time, where we are diving into Global Compact for Migration Objective number 4. So we'll be sharing all those details again in the classroom, and then once again next Saturday to continue the special lecture series. Thank you very much for your active attention and for your very active engagement. Dr. Benjamin, thank you very much.